guys, welcome back to part 16 of our Firebase real-time chat app series. First and foremost, congrats if you've made it this far. I know this series has gotten pretty long, can get a little boring at times, but props to you. In this part, we're going to be taking a look at swiping to delete a conversation, and we're also going to clean up a few other things along the way. So that said, let's open up our project folder here and jump right in. So we're going to open up that workspace. And we're going to actually fix something before we talk about deleting a conversation. Over here, I've got Firebase pulled up to my console, and we want to go to the Messenger application here. And we'll just let it sit here for a second. So let's go ahead and select our simulator. I think we've got this one open. Let's hit run. So basically right now, you may have noticed in the previous video, there is a small bug in our app. Once we log in, rather I can show you guys, I think that'll be probably easier. When we log in, basically the conversations don't immediately load for the logged in user. We have to close the app and reopen. And it's because of the way that we've set up our current architecture to fetch conversations, and you'll see in a moment. So if I come over here and I sign in with Joe's account, and what did we say his password was? I think password. So Joe should have one conversation, and if we hit this, we'll sign in, but you see like this doesn't refresh, and I don't think this refreshes either. Well, this one refreshes, but the picture doesn't actually load. Well, okay, there it goes. The reason this one refreshes is because this controller isn't in memory yet, but this one doesn't refresh the conversations. But if we close and reopen it, you'll see that the conversations will come in like that, and we're gonna fix that. So let me go ahead and come to the profile and sign out here and close this app and reopen it. And let's take a look at why that's happening. So we're gonna go to the conversation list and we're gonna see where that conversation fetch business is going on. So I think I called it fetch. Yeah, so we called it, let's see, fetch conversations, table view is hidden as false. And that can't be all we're doing in here. Let's see. Where are we listening for conversations? So we've got, it should be a viewed load if I'm not mistaken. Let's find viewed load. Here it is, start listening for conversations. So it looks like in this conversation we say if there is an email, we're gonna continue. So we do a guard let for the email, and we start listening here. Now the problem becomes when a user first logs in, or rather first opens the app and they're in a logged out state, there's no email here, so we're not going to continue. Now, while that behavior is correct when we're logged out, we want to notify this function to get fired once the user has signed in, right? And once they've signed in, like we have an email now, so we should get their conversations, and there's no reason a user should have to close the app and reopen. So we're going to leverage a notification to basically kick off that occurrence. So let's see, we're going to come over here and under resources, if I'm not mistaken, I think we added an extensions like that. And we have this notification extension that we added here for did login notification. So the reason we added this is we're going to fire this notification off once the user signs in. And based on that, we can kick off some functionality. So if we come over here with a project-wide search, you can see that we use this in login view controller, and looks like what do we do here? We set an observer, and once the user has logged in, we call dismiss on this controller. I believe we initially set this up because the Google sign-in is handled in the app delegate. So we wanted this controller to be able to get notified. This is the login screen to dismiss once Google has signed in. So we're going to basically copy this and notice that we assign it to an observer. It's an NS object protocol up here. We're going to want that wherever we use this. And we're going to go to our conversation view controller. And up here, rather in viewed load, I guess, what we are going to do is paste that guy in. And we are going to define this login observer up here. It'll be a private, and let's spell private correctly, private var, and it was a NS object protocol. And basically, whenever this notification gets fired, this block will get executed. And all we're doing in here is unwrapping self to strong self. And then what we're going to do is we're going to now say strong self, and we're going to call that fetch function again, right? Rather not fetch, we're going to call that listen function. So in other words, once the user logs in, we'll come in and call this again. And what we'll also do is we probably want to get rid of the notification, and we also want to get rid of my virus pop-up. So what we're going to do is in here, we're going to say if let observer equals this, we can get rid of it because we have the user signed in now, so there's no reason to continue to have this notification observance. So let's do that. Default, and we want to remove an observer, and we can pass in observer. And this should be functional now, hopefully. So let's say Command B. And give that a second. Let's say Command R to build and run, and then hopefully this works, and then we can jump into deleting conversations. So we're here on the login screen, and we are going to log in with Joe's account. So we're going to say joe@gmail.com. And we're going to type in password, and then we're going to hit this, and we should fetch our conversations immediately like that. So awesome. We're in business, looking good. And let's talk about deleting. So similar to any table view or any list, like to-do list item list, you should be able to swipe this and get a delete action here. And once you delete it away, we should also make a database update over here. So the conversation has been deleted, and when we subsequently open up the app, we don't want to see that conversation there. Now, something important in here to keep in mind is when you are deleting a conversation, it's a two-directional system, right? So if you and I are having a conversation in our app, when I delete it, that doesn't necessarily mean it should disappear from your app. And that's the reason that we set up our database over here to not only have a root conversation that holds all our messages, but for each user to have a conversation collection. So if one user deletes a conversation, we can delete the reference in their conversation collection, and it'll remove it from their list, but not necessarily the other user's list. So let's go ahead and implement that. So pretty straightforward to do that. What we want to do is implement two table view functions. And let's see where I've got my table view stuff going on. Looks like right here. So the two table view functions we want are editing style. And this function is basically, well, this is commit editing style. This gets called once we have actually swiped the row away. And what we want to do also is bring in another function called just editing style. And this function basically wants the editing style to be returned for the given index path. And let's look at the whole function here. It wants this type of object back. And what we want to return is delete. And I think there's three in here, if memory serves. Insert, delete, and sum, which can let you define a custom one, but we won't get into that. So we're going to do delete. And in this function here, we need to basically handle that delete action. So that entails two things. The first thing is actually getting rid of the row. And the second thing is updating the backing model. So if we don't update the model after we've deleted a row, your app is going to crash because there's going to be a mismatch of the model array that is driving the table view will have one additional entry, whereas your rows will have one less. So there will be a collision there, and it'll crash. So here we are first going to say if editing style is delete, begin delete. We're going to first allow the table view to start updating, so begin updates. And then we're going to say table view commit updates. And I think it's commit updates. Might be end updates. That's what I'm thinking of. There it is, end updates. And in here, like I mentioned, we want to do two things. So let's first update our model. So in this function, we get a couple parameters. We get the editing style, which we're already using over here to make sure it's delete. We also get a index path, which references which row we are swiping on. So we can say self table.conversations, which is our collection of conversations, we want to remove at indexPath.row. The reason we can use .row directly is because our table view has only one section, and we can actually get rid of this self dot. Then we can say table view, and we want to remove, or it might be called deletes, because Apple loves to rename things all the time. We want to delete rows at indexPath, and this will be a collection and pass in that one indexPath parameter that comes in this function. And then we can specify a animation. So I'm gonna go with, let's go with left. I think that's what we want. So you'll notice right now when we actually run this, we should be able to swipe away our conversations, but when we close and open the app, they're still gonna come back. So if we start swiping this, you'll see we get the delete, and we can get rid of it like that. So one issue you see off the bat is we should be seeing our label here now, saying basically no conversations. And the other more pressing issue is when we open this up, this guy comes back. So we definitely don't want to be talking to this person anymore. So we truly want to delete their conversation. So let's do that. So the way we're going to implement that is by updating our database manager. And our database manager will take a function, a new function, and that new function will allow us to delete a conversation. So I'm going to come all the way down here, make sure this is in the extension. I think it is. Let's see if I can get the corner. There we go. Let's come back down here, and we're going to add one function in here. And this is going to be a public func, and we're going to call it delete conversation. And we're going to pass in the conversation ID. And this is going to be a string. And this whole thing will take a completion block, which will be an escaping closure, which has a boolean and returns void. And let's actually implement this. It should be fairly easy. The first thing we want to do is get the current user's email address. So email is user default, standard, value for key, email as a string. And some of you guys have actually mentioned in the comments that we can get this directly off the Firebase user. So the reason I actually don't do that on purpose is because reading something from Firebase is more CPU and memory consumption. And the reason is the way that Firebase stores objects and key value coding, which is why I like to cache the email like this. So if you're one of those people that asked why, that's the answer why. If you have no clue what I'm talking about, ignore me, and let's just continue with this. So we basically get the email as a string out of the user default, and this is looking good. It has a warning we're not using the string yet, or the email. So we're gonna say safe email is database manager, safe email, and pass in the email. Now the workflow that we want to do is basically get all conversations for current user, delete conversation in collection with target ID, reset those conversations for the user in database. So how do we do this? Basically what we're going to do is say database.child. Child node will be the safe email, and we're going to do a observe single event, and we want the top one here. We're going to observe the value, and we're going to get this closure with a snapshot in here. And then in the snapshot, what we can say is if var, we actually can observe the user/conversations. So we can actually go one level down, because in our database, we already know over here that in a given user node, we have a conversations, if that user has a conversation. And then each of those has these properties. And what we care about is the ID that we're passing in. So let's see. So we're getting the safe email / the conversations. We're going to observe a single value, and then we're going to get a snapshot back in this closure. And the other thing I'm going to do is make this another variable, because we're going to use it again. So I'm going to say ref and we'll say let ref for reference equals that. And we're going to say if var conversations equals snapshot dot value as a array of dictionaries that we can continue. The reason we have if var and not if let is because this needs to be mutable. So you'll see that in just a second. So we're going to say var position to remove is 0. And then what we are going to do is iterate over for conversation in conversations. We're going to say if conversation, actually we're going to say if let conversation, let's just call it ID, be lazy. If let ID equals conversation, singular, ID as a string, and the ID equals conversation ID, which is the parameter we're passing in. We have basically found the position that we want to use to delete. So we're going to say this plus equals 1 down here to increment it. But if we have found the position that we want, we're simply going to break out of the for loop. And now we can use this position to delete that element in the array. So go ahead and hit Command B, and this warning should go away. It's complaining that it's mutable and we're not using it, but we are. So there it goes. Xcode decides to just not work half the time. So now we can say conversations, and we want to remove at the position to remove. And once we have removed it, we basically now just need to update this reference with this new value, which is why we put ref as a variable. So we can say ref set value conversations, and we want the one with the completion. So this takes a completion block, and I think this has a error and something else in here. So we're going to just validate an error doesn't occur. So we're going to say guard error equals nil, otherwise we can return, and otherwise we are good to go. And in the completion handler we can pass back true. In this case something definitely went wrong, so we can say false. And let's see here, let's add some print statements. We can say deleted conversation, failed to write new conversation array. And let's see, here we can say print found conversation to delete. And let me make sure this is right. So we initially say the index is 0, which will be the first one. After we iterate it, we increment every single time, which looks good to me. And let's see what else. We're going to put in here a print to say deleting conversation with ID. And we're going to interpolate the conversation ID, which is the parameter that we've got right above it coming in. And we should be good to go. So go ahead and hit Command B, and we got to actually use this function now that we've defined it. And I should also fix this error that we have down here. So we've got completion true. So why is this complaining? Completion true. Hit Command B. Okay, it looks like I definitely spelled something wrong that time. So that's all good to go. Let's go back to the conversation view controller, and we want to call that function in here. So before we actually remove the cell, what we will do is we're going to say database manager shared, and what did I call it? Delete. We want to delete a conversation with an ID and a completion, and this is going to be success in, and this is going to be the conversation ID. So where do we get that from, right? So we already know that in the conversations array, we can grab the conversation. So we can say let's conversation ID equals conversations, and the position of the conversation is indexPath.row, and then off of this we can simply grab the ID string. Then we can pass in this guy into here, and once the actual conversation has deleted successfully and the boolean comes back in our async block, what we can do in here is we could actually get rid of that conversation as well as call the delete. So we can say if success, do this. Now we don't want to cause a memory leak, so we're going to do self optional off of this and make sure you pass in weak self here, and this error will go away. And let's go ahead and give this a run. So go ahead and hit Command R, and let's see what we get. So we are going to delete this conversation over here, and it has gone away. And if we take a look at our console for all our print statements, you can see that it was successfully deleted. So it's saying we're deleting a conversation with this ID, but only for the current user. And it found the conversation to delete, and let's see, failed to fetch. So it failed to fetch once, so this print is coming from after we deleted the conversation. We no longer have any more conversations, so it tried to update our conversation list but wasn't able to, which is why it failed. But if we open this up again, we shouldn't have any conversations here. So perfect. No conversations are coming in. If we come over here, we deleted it for the user Joe. So under Joe, you can notice that conversation collection is gone now, and the key is gone because basically that array was empty, so we don't need it anymore. But more importantly, conversation still exists for the other user that was in the conversation. So when they log in, they will still see it. So that is how you can basically delete conversations. Now what becomes interesting is what happens when I start another conversation with that user. So I just deleted it here, but if I search for this, and if I start another conversation, and I come in here, and this should pop up the keyboard, but it's not because my computer keyboard is connected, and just be like, hey, and hit send. First thing that we notice is, well, nothing is really happening here. Well, what actually it was happening, we were sending it, but the visual wasn't working. But we now have this this conversation that started here. Let me close and reopen this. And you'll see we have this chat head here. But what's interesting is what probably went ahead and happened is for Joe's conversation, or Joe's user, we have that conversation added. We also have another unique conversation root node with that hey message that I went ahead and sent. But we probably have a duplicate in here. So if we open this up and open up this thing, so let's see, we have this conversations, this conversation that. So this does not look right to me. So we are updating, this should be a collection similar to what we've got down here. So it looks like we definitely have a bug somewhere in here. So what I'm going to do is let's pause this video here, rather let's wrap up this video here, and in the next video, before we get into audio messages and some other cleanup and such, we're going to go through this and debug all the things and polish up what we've already got here. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you haven't smashed that like button already, make sure to do so for the YouTube algorithm. Helps out quite a bit. Subscribe if you're new. Comment down below if you have any errors or questions. I generally reply within a few days at the absolute most. I'll catch you guys in the next part.